So the first thing to keep in mind is our insects have separate sexes. And again, we will not see any animals the rest of the year that are hermaphrodites. We always have males and females. And a lot of times with our animals, several of them are easy to tell apart. So when the male fertilizes the eggs, it is external fertilization. He will pass his sperm to the female, typically using his abdomen. And either he'll actually deposit in an opening in the female or he'll transfer her a sperm packet. One thing that's greatly contributed to our insect success is the fact that they lay so many eggs. So some insects will reproduce by using an egg case, and some will lay like individual eggs. But either way, they tend to lay several. So for example, in that video that you watched earlier, you probably noticed that honeybees can lay up to 2 million eggs in their lifetime, the queen can. So again, if something is laying, thousands of eggs per day, it would be very, very hard to get rid of that species, and that's one of the things that helps them survive so well. Okay, so when organisms develop, they can develop in one of two ways. And so this is either known as complete metamorphosis or incomplete metamorphosis. And on the test, you would need to draw this. So when I see you next time, we will probably go ahead and draw these together. But, when you look at complete metamorphosis, that means they're going through a complete change. And you would typically think of, like, say, a butterfly for that. I went away from the butterfly because I want you to learn these new terms for it. So, the female's going to lay eggs, and she'll lay eggs kind of in a cluster, not so much in a case. The eggs are going to hatch and they're going to develop as larvae. So in a butterfly, that larvae is a caterpillar. Here it looks a little different because this is like, a ladybug, which is actually a lady beetle. Okay, the next stage is that larvae grows into a pupa. And the pupa is kind of the stage where it's in a case. The organism is growing inside, but it's got this hard protective case on the outside. And that's where it's kind of growing and developing. And what happens is it has to eat a lot in its larval form for this development to take place. Okay, and then finally it hatches and you have the adult. So again, this is complete metamorphosis because it goes through a complete change. This baby, this larvae, does not really look anything like this adult. Okay, so if we contrast this with incomplete metamorphosis, here it's known as simple, it's slightly different. Okay, and so the way that this is different is because instead of having something that looks very, very, very different from the adult, maybe not even an insect, we have a smaller stage known as a nymph. Okay, we still start as an egg, and maybe even an egg case like what you saw earlier. Okay, but then when the organism hatches and it becomes this little nymph stage. And the nymph is kind of like a smaller version of the insect. Although they still may look different, they definitely look like an insect. Okay, and so instead of like going through a pupal form where it grows and develops inside a case, the nymph just grows larger and larger until it becomes an adult. Okay, so again, this is incomplete metamorphosis or simple metamorphosis. And the difference is the eggs develop into a nymph stage, which is kind of like a smaller version of the adult. An interesting thing about a lot of our insects that I wish we could talk about more is the fact that they have social, some of them live in a social aspect, they live in a colony and they exhibit social behavior. So these would be like your ants, your termites, and your bees. So they organize themselves into social groups. Out of all of them, honeybees are probably the most complex social organizations, although ants can be pretty complex too, because ants can have several different types of ant living in one colony. So when you're in a colony, it's kind of like what we learned about earlier with cnidarians. Some have certain jobs, and that's the only job they do, but they contribute to the entire colony working. However, what's different is a lot of them can kind of survive on they can kind of survive on their own, but they kind of can't. So from the video you can kind of see why. So the queen, for example, her only job is to lay eggs, and that's what she does her entire life. And she really can't survive on her own because she's so big she has to be fed by the worker bees. The drones, those are the only males in the colony, and their only job is to mate with the queen, and that's it. And again, their lives aren't very long, but they might build a hive. There are ones that go out and forage and go and find nectar and pollen. Well, they pollinate, but they go out and find nectar to bring back to make honey. And those are females, and they actually run the colony. And so everyone has a different job that they do in the colony. And again, termites are the same way, and ants are the same way as well. And it's very interesting. Okay, so final slide deals with insects and how humans perceive them as general. So really, mostly we see them as being pests. They annoy us, they eat our crops, they destroy our food, but they're really both beneficial and harmful. So, for example, if we did not have our insects, they wouldn't be pollinating several of our crops in the first place. Okay, so scientists are actually worried about, there have been a lot of bee colonies collapsing or dying off, and scientists are worried about it because bees pollinate several of the crops we eat and survive upon. Okay, and so they're really, really beneficial in terms of pollination. We need them for that. However, they're also very harmful because of the way they destroy our crops and eat our plants. I mean, and you can see from this picture here, they really can just overtake it. And so it's kind of an interesting, love and hate relationship that we have with insects.